Hello and welcome to another episode on Captain's Dry Dock, and in a dry dock today we'll be making the Admiral Rank Bars that were seen in Star Trek The Next Generation, Voyager, Deep Space Nine and the movies. Let's make it real. So welcome to Fusion 360, and if you've seen my channel before, you'd recognise that I use this program a lot when it comes to modelling up props and models to be 3D printed later. And here we go, this is the final render of the Admiral Rank Bar. Now as you can see at the back, I've actually got the back plate as well, so that secures onto the bar there because it's held on with magnets. So if I just move that, you can see two location points for two magnets. The magnets I think are 7mm by 2mm rare earth disc magnets, but the diameter of these holes is 8mm, just because you don't want something too tight in tolerance and you're having to really push that thing in and probably crack the resin later. And then obviously there's the two other magnets, they go there. Now those points you see, it's quite common in all the badges that I produce, and this was suggested to me by a viewer to actually add this to a backplate I think last year. And it's a good point. When you wear a magnetic badge such as this, they will slip as you start walking around, even if you have really strong powerful magnets. And to stop that slipping, these pointy cones here, and you may recognize these on other badges that you may have, they just dig in slightly into the cloth and just stop that badge from floating all the way down your tunic to your belly button. So that's a lovely little thing. And also they don't damage the cloth either because they're resin and they're not actually that sharp. So that is the final render. And obviously, and I say obviously, but I include this to all these badges because I think it's a nice touch. Starfleet issue Admiral, so that's embossed, there you go, I think just by 0.5 of a millimeter, and that's just a lovely little touch to have. That even when you take this off and you put that on the table, that just looks cool. So now I'm going to go through how I made this. It's pretty simple, but the key thing about this badge, like many of the Star Trek badges, is getting that curve. Now the first thing I did was get hold of reference, and thankfully the person I made this for supplied me with this fantastic picture. I think this one is from Anavos, but with also the measurements, really accurate measurements, which helps greatly on a build like this. So the next thing to do was to actually make this bar. So it'd be two components. This was clearly one component, and I will open that one up now. I'll show you the steps. So this is the history. So I used the emboss tool. Now first off, I needed to get the curvature. Now when it comes to these badges, this is the radius I come up with using references from the person who gave me these measurements. So once I made the circle, I made it a solid. And then after that, I used the emboss tool. Now this is something that was included in Fusion 360 I think last year, and it's right there. So essentially what it is, you can make a sketch on top of this. So as you can see, I made a sketch. So essentially all I did was trace that image and then I embossed it. So there we go, there's the image embossed into the actual solid, and just started to cut it out. I made another circle on the interior and then I cut it out, and there we go. It was as easy as that. Really simple to actually do. It looks harder than what it is, but it really isn't. Then after that is the fine details, because nothing sharp on these props, because generally they're usually made by hand. So I added a fillet on all the edges, and actually more importantly, there is a lovely fillet which goes from the pip all the way to the black enamel. Now I'm assuming there was one there because it may actually be just the effect of the paint. If you look at the reference pictures, there is a slight fillet going in, but I thought that I include that anyway because it just depends how thick your paint is, and I wanted to have my paint not too thick because I don't want to see brush strokes, and also it can open up to a whole world of issues later. The next thing I needed to do was the plate. Exactly the same process. So again, I made a circle, I made it a solid, and then all I did was project that shape, because in Fusion 360 you can project a shape rather than having to redraw it, you can project it. So essentially I just got hold of this shape here and then embossed it into this shape there. Exactly the same process as the bar, as simple as that. And then after that, if I just remove the bar, you can see everything else I did on this. So next thing I needed to do was actually add the magnets, the location points and magnets. So I just made 2 circles and then embossed those into the backplate, and then added the cones. And how I did that was just did 4 circles, extruded them out, and then gave them a fillet. I think it's called a fillet. I always get chamfer and fillet made up, mixed around, but yeah, added a fillet. So exactly the same thing with the chamfers, especially on the back plate, because it's going to be on the inside and rubbing up against you. You don't want those sharp corners digging into your neck. So it was really important to add those chamfers all the way around. And finally, the magic touch, which I love doing, is the little label which is embossed in the back plate. Starfleet issue Admiral, and it's really simple to do. You just type out the text and then emboss that into it, and I think that is, as I mentioned before, 0.5 of a millimeter. And there we have it, the completed model, which are then taken into render, added the color, and I can finally see what the thing may look like when it's printed out and painted. And I always say to do this process, even though you don't need to render it because it's going to be made real later, it's not going to be a 3D model which is going to stay on screen. It's always good to actually add color later on, even though it's not the exact color. It's not going to be this shiny. It's going to be used I'm going to use a painted gold, but it gives you an indication of if there's any imperfections, if it looks right, because this looks way different than just the SketchUp model. And once I'm happy with this, I will just save this as an STL and then pop that onto my 3D printer. Admiral uniforms. They changed so much throughout Star Trek. In fact, in Star Trek Next Generation, they must have changed a handful of times, to the point I didn't know what the rank was until one of the other characters referenced it. In fact, it didn't really stop changing until we got to Deep Space Nine and the movies, where they wore something reminiscent of this. The difference being there was gold piping around the edges, and they wore a really cool belt with a nice cool belt buckle. And in fact, one of the few things that didn't change throughout all the Admiral uniforms since, shall we say, Star Trek Next Generation Season 3 were the rank bars. Those were the only things that were consistent throughout all the uniforms. Why they kept on changing those uniforms, I do not know. Perhaps the Admirals were just really picky. But one thing I can say as a personal opinion, the Picard Show Admiral uniform, that's got to be my least favourite. I don't know what your thoughts are, but perhaps the best one is the one which is a version of this. So now that I've exported the STL file, I can't send that straight to a printer to be printed. It has to go to a program called a slicer. Now there's many different types of slicer programs. This one is Chitubox, or however you like to pronounce it, and it's representing a bed of my 3D printer. So that blue square is the bed of which the object is going to be printed on. Now what I do now, I get the STL file and I drag it onto the bed, and it automatically sets it flat on the bed, which isn't really a good idea because number one, it will stick to that bed really firmly, and so trying to take it off may damage it. And also with all types of 3D printing, whether it be filament or resin, you'll get the infamous elephant's foot. That's right, when something's printed flat on the bed, some of the residue will start coming outwards like an elephant's foot, like there's a lot of weight on it, and it distorts the object, and it's an absolute nightmare to clean up afterwards. So to get around that, I have to reposition this. So first off, I want to rotate this. So I want to rotate it on its side, and I do that by 90 degrees. And also I want to see it coming out of the vat of resin, like Terminator 2. And so I want to have it facing me when I look into the box, just to check that everything's looking good. So I rotated that by 90 degrees, and then I make it diagonal. Now the purpose of this, well, one of the purposes is to actually get as many as I can onto the bed. It saves a lot of space, and for some reason the quality goes up. I don't know why, it's just something that's been taught when actually positioning models for 3D resin printing. And then I raise it by 5mm, floating in the air. Not to worry, I will be adding supports, but this will stop that infamous elephant's foot from happening because none of the model is actually touching the base. This is where the supports come in. Now if I go to the right hand panel, there's a supports panel, and it looks like the cockpit of an airplane. It really is intimidating. So you've got the different types of supports, light, medium or heavy, meaning like the thickness of them, the different types of shapes, the diameters. In fact, a lot of the actual programs defaults do work, and I have to say, when I first started 3D printing resin, that's what I did, and that's what I continue to do. So what it's already done, it's actually added a resin base ready to take supports, and all I do is just click all, and there we have it. It actually adds all the supports onto the object automatically. I can check all the way around, make sure it all looks supported, and in fact it gives you a guide of what should be supported. So any red pinkish tints means that some support's needed, and through experience other pink tints I can actually ignore because I know it will work, and that's that. So it's as easy as that. Now in fact the Admiral bars, there's 2 of them, so I need to go back and do another one of these. So rather than do the whole process all over again, just like MS Word or any other program where you can copy and paste, you've got a clone button. So if I click onto the object, click onto clone, boom, there we go. I can clone the object and it supports. So it saves so much time. And what I like to do, I like to butt them up together, because more square surface area on the bed means that it's less likely to fall into the vat of resin, which has happened to me before. It doesn't always happen, don't have to do it like this, but this is what I tend to do when I'm making multiples of things. Now I actually have to add the back plate. So again, same sort of procedure. I'll drag the file over, STL file, it automatically lies it flat, and I'll need to rotate it all. So now if I'm not happy where the support is, there is actually a way of repositioning it. So with this one, not that it's a big deal, I'm going to use this as an example. It's actually going to protrude from the back or the front. So back here, that's going to need some cleaning up. But what I can do, and this is a really good thing about this bit here, let me just reposition this. I can delete a support like that, and then add the support where I want it, where it's not going to interfere with the model. So if I just position it there we go. So now that's going to be on the edge, and that's not going to be seen, especially after I sand it. Now, as you just saw there, if it went over here, anything in red, that means it's not going to get printed, and it's going to be an absolute mess. So just to make sure it stays within the blue square. And that's ready. Now I need to slice it, but before I slice it, you don't actually have to do it every single time, but you can check the settings. So if I click on the settings here, so the first thing I needed to do when I had this program was to tell it what machine I had. So there's all the values for the machine, and then you've got the resin, and there are different types of resin. So if you look here, each resin has a different optimal value in regards to getting printed. Now if I open up this web page here, the community resin settings, these are the recommendations by the 3D printing community. What's the best settings for any given resin? So you go down the left hand side, the brands, there you go, you got all this is the brand that I use, and then you go across, if it's clear, if it's grey, if it's black, it even tells you where you can get it. And there's all the values, so the layer height, the bottom layer count, the bottom exposure time, and with those values you can pop them in here. In fact, you don't actually have to do that. Like when I first started printing, resin printing, I just used the defaults and it worked. It was only until I started playing around with different types of resins that I had very different results, and so I used that spreadsheet to program in what I felt was actually the most optimal values for the resin that I had. And that's it. So you only have to do that once, and again when you come back into your slicer, it will keep those settings, and you can change those as and when you start becoming more and more experienced like I have. Now all I do is press this magic button, slice. Takes a few seconds, and there we have it. It's telling me the volume, it tells me the weight, it tells me the price. I don't know how it works out the price. I think it just works out how much the resins cost to actually make this. And this is the most important one for me, is the time. So it takes 5 hours, 35 minutes and 5 seconds. Now it's not because of the quantity, It's because the amount of layers and the amount of detail it's taken to actually print this off. Because let's just give an example. If I even clone another one of these, another one of these, another one of these, and I do another slice, there we go. The time it takes is exactly the same. So it doesn't matter how many models I have on the bed. It's all about the level of detail and the settings I've put in place to be able to get a good quality piece out of the resin and the vat. Now this is really good to know the time, because it means that I know when I go to bed tonight I will actually put this on to print, and so when I wake up in the morning it should be all done. And because it's been hanging upside down out of the vat, because as the 3D printer starts printing it will take it all the way out, and so any residue will drop back into the vat of resin, which means it's basically drip dried and ready to be washed. Now all I need to do is do a save and save that onto the USB for this printer, and I'm good to go. So I've come back after leaving it overnight to print, and I'll just remove the covers because now it's going to go for a wash. Now looking at that, that has turned out to be fantastic. Again, really crisp detail. Some of the text you can't actually see because there's still some liquid resin in there, but that will wash off once it has a bath. And to have a bath, just need to attach it to a bracket and then pop it into a water container. And it's water because this is the newest resin which is all water washable, where it means I don't have to use any dangerous chemicals or alcohol to clean off the parts. Pop the cover back on. Set this, I usually put it on for about 7 minutes just to make sure all that extra residue has been washed off, and then I press on. All cleaned off now. It's much clearer to see the text. Get the old scraper off. There we go. So it took some doing there, but as you can see it's now off. Now I'm going to put that in the airing cupboard. You can actually put this anywhere where it's going to be dry and dark, and let that dry off before I cure it. So it's been a few hours, and as you can see it's nice and dry, but it's still a little bit soft because it needs to be cured. Now this particular resin uses UV light, so I can actually pop that on a windowsill and let the sun do its best. However, it's good to do it with one of these which does it really quickly with UV bulbs. So let me just turn this from a washing machine into a curing station by adding a plate, which is a turntable, popping on those parts there. Then I change the modes to UV light, not washing machine. Put the case back on, and I usually do this for around about 7 minutes. So these are cured now, and they're pretty brittle when it comes to the support, so they can just be snapped off. But I need to do some preparation before I can even think about painting. Now those supports have left little marks there, and all I need to do is just use a little bit of sandpaper, wet and dry, just so I can make that all flush. And then afterwards, once that's nice and flush and there's no evidence of any support structure there, I always get myself a bowl of water, soapy water, and I just give it a bath. Give it a wash just in case there's any residue left over from the process, because once you start painting you don't want the residue making the paint peel off afterwards. So I like to give it a wash, perhaps leave it a soak, come back, let it dry, and then it'll be ready to paint. So now I've applied the gold, that's all sprayed on. It's not looking too bad actually, and now I need to apply the black. So I'm going to use Tamiya Gloss Black. In fact, I really started to like Tamiya paints now. I used to always use Games Workshop paints, but I think you get a lot more quality out of this than Games Workshop paints, and actually it smells quite nice as well. But yeah, so what we'll do, we'll just pop that there, and this is where it takes the steady hand. So these are for the Admiral, so you've got to make sure they get a good rank bar. And all I'm doing here is just carefully, just actually loading up the brush quite a lot and letting the viscosity of the paint just bleed into the edges all the way. So at this stage I can imagine viewers are thinking, oh, he's going to hiccup, he's going to make a mistake. But you know what, it's not too bad. It's not the end of the world when there's a mistake, especially when you're doing something like this, because let's just say I go over the gold bits which should stay as gold. What I can do is go back and touch that up with the same sort of brush and with the exact same gold paint, and that's how I'll do it. So yeah, it takes some time, but the results are awesome. And as you can see, even though it's wet, it gives you an indication of how cool it will look with the gloss black once it dries, in contrast of the gold. And that's easy. That's the great thing about this particular prop. It means a lot, but it's very, very, very simple. It's just two colors, gold and gloss black.